Hello to everybody. So we go to this seventh strange and wonderful thing about the Dharma today. We're skipping the sixth because Sankarachta has done a wonderful lecture on the sixth strange and wonderful thing about the Dharma, the taste of freedom. I said last week, if you can listen to that lecture during the week. But anyway, we're going to the seventh now. I'm just going to plunge straight in. The seventh strange and wonderful thing, here we go, about the ocean. The great ocean contains many precious substances, various precious substances, such as these: pearl, crystal, beryl, conch, quartz, coral, silver, gold, ruby, and cat's eye. This is the seventh wonderful and marvelous quality of the great ocean. I don't know if the great ocean really does have all those things in it, but that's the imagined ocean, remember. It's the imagined ocean we're dealing with, not the real ocean. So then, just as the great ocean contains many precious substances, etc., etc., so also this Dharma and discipline contains many precious things. Various precious things, such as these: the four foundations of mindfulness, the four right efforts, the four bases of successful accomplishment, the five faculties, the five powers, the seven enlightenment factors, and the noble eightfold path. This is the seventh wonderful and marvelous quality in this Dharma and discipline, seeing which bhikkhus delight in this Dharma and discipline. This is John Ireland's translation. Thanissaro has, seeing which bhikkhus take great joy in this Dharma and discipline. So many weeks ago now, I think it might have been the second talk, maybe the third, I said that at some point during this series, I was going to have a look at this delighting quality of the Dharma and discipline. And now I'm going to do it. So I went for my usual walk today, through the little park, down to the river, turned right at the river, and through the meadow, and then Peel Park, laid down in the sun for a while, came back. And I saw many, many delightful things, and I felt many delightful feelings. So the weather was gorgeous. The sun was shining. There was a lovely cool breeze. Not that cool, but just right. A lot of people in the park. People are beginning to relax the lockdown in this country, even though we're not supposed to. I think we've had enough of it now. So a lot of people in the park playing football, sitting around with each other, sunbathing. And that was really delightful as I lay there listening to people. It was really delightful. Coming back along the river, I saw two geese, Canada geese, with 7 goslings, Canada goslings, following after. It was absolutely gorgeous. And the sun was shining on the river. So I could see on the top of the river, the surface of the river, the sun and the blue sky. It was just delightful, utterly delightful. So the first half of this talk, I'm going to talk about the delights of the Dharma and delighting in the Dharma, because I think it's really important. So as usual, I'm going to take the Pali word, which is translated as delight, taking delight, is abhiramanti. Abhiramanti, which comes from the word abhirati. And abhirati is made up of two words really: rati, R-A-T-I, not rati the rat in what's that book I was reading to you? I can't remember. Anyway, rati, R-A-T-I, means delight, and abhi is great, very much. So it really means with great delight, with very much delight. Yes, and abhiramati, a connected word, abhiramati means to sport, to enjoy oneself, to find pleasure in or with, to indulge in love. And ramati Abhiramati. So ramati means to enjoy oneself, to delight in, to sport, to find amusement. I could go on. I've got lots of Pali words here, but I think I've given you enough now. So this is the word. And what's interesting about when you read it in the Pali, at the end of each section on each of the 8 things, both in the ocean section and in the Dharma section, the final word of each section is delight, or taking delight. The final word is abhiramanti. So it's quite interesting. As you read through, as you look at the Pali, you get the impression at the end of each section, it's delight, taking delight. And I think that might be quite significant. So what I want to do today, the first half of the talk anyway, is talk about delighting in the Dharma and say a few words about how important it is to see if you can delight in the Dharma and find ways that you can delight in the Dharma. So from here, I'm going to move on to another text, the Parabhava Sutta. Now, this week, I was a good speaker, and I sent all the references to Sundeep. And as I mention each sutta, she's going to put it in the chat. There it is. It's in the chat box there. So those of you who want to look things up can do so. So the Parabhava Sutta from the Sutta Nipata. And let me just read that to you. The first bit. A deva comes to see the Buddha. And the deva asks the Buddha a question. He says, I've come to ask you, Blessed One, what is the cause of someone's downfall or decline? Why do people decline? Why do they fall back? And the Buddha said, well, that's easy. The lover of the Dharma prospers, the hater of the Dharma declines. So I want to look at this idea of the lover of the Dharma. So that's a translation of Dharma karma. Karma, that's K-A with a line over it, which means it's a long A. K, long A, M-A, karma. And it's the same word as we find in the Kama Sutra. You all know what the Kama Sutra is. It's all to do with sensual pleasures and getting the very best sensual pleasure out of the sexual act. So that's where karma comes from. And it means, just read you from the Pali English Dictionary, karma means enjoyment, but especially sense enjoyment, sense pleasure, and it also means sense desire. And it says, in all the enumerations of obstacles to enlightenment, karma occupies the leading position. Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? Karma occupies the leading position for obstacles to your further growth and development. Karma is most frequently connected with passion, impulse, greed, all expressing the active, clinging, and impulsive character of desire. And here it's used in a positive sense. The Buddha said, if you love the Dharma, if you are a lover of the Dharma, karma Dhamma, then you'll make progress. So I think that's very interesting that the Buddha is using a really, really strong word, a word which everyone in India at that time would have been familiar with. And it means like almost an extreme desire for pleasure. And what the Buddha seems to be saying is that strong desire that you all know, that strong desire to have sense pleasures, you've got to have the same impulse towards the Dharma. You've got to feel the same strongly. You've got to be really attracted to it. And then if you're really attracted to the Dharma, you'll make progress on the path. You'll grow and develop. Yes. So that's that sutta. And then there's also, here's a nice one. This is from the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta 111. And here the Buddha is talking about Sariputta, his great friend and disciple Sariputta. And he starts off, what he does in that text is he tells people about Sariputta's enlightenment. And he begins by talking about 6 forms of wisdom that Sariputta possesses. He says, Sariputta is astute. The word is pandito, wise, clever, circumspect, intelligent. He has great wisdom, maha panya, great wisdom. He has widespread wisdom, putu panya. This is connected to what I was talking about last week with the ocean, how widespread it is. Widespread wisdom. He has swift wisdom. I won't tell you all the Pali words. Sharp wisdom and penetrating wisdom. But also, and this is really nice, he has laughing wisdom. Sariputta possesses laughing wisdom. It's hasa panya. Hasa, other translators translate it differently, of course. I've seen joyous wisdom and so on, but hasa means mirth, it means to laugh, it means to smile, it means to be amused, really. So I really love that. So the idea that an aspect of wisdom is that you laugh, you're really enjoying yourself, you're having great fun in a way. And then there's, I've got all these in the wrong way round here. No, I haven't, yes. So the beginning of the Ratnaguna Samchayagata, which I often quote to you, I think I've quoted it twice so far, I'm just going to quote it again. The opening line, before you read the sutra, this is what you're supposed to do. Call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. And then you can listen to the Dharma. So I just want to take the first word there, love, call forth as much as you can of love. And the Sanskrit is prema. That's the Sanskrit version of the Pali, pema. Now, some of you have come across the word pema or pema. You might pronounce it pema. And this is usually understood to be the near enemy of metta. So metta is love for all beings, completely unselfish. And pema is a near enemy in that you love or you're attracted, but it's a bit selfish. It's to do with me. And it's kind of an attached love. So it's usually understood, pema and prema are both usually understood to be negative mental states. But actually the Buddha here is using it in a really positive way. And I think similarly to the Pawabhava Sutra, I think what he's trying to get at is, you know, that love, that selfish love, where you really want something or somebody, you really want to feel you need them. It's the same, you know, that you've got to have the same kind of intensity towards the Dharma. And I'm thinking also of the Metta Sutta, where halfway through the Metta Sutta, the Buddha says, just as a mother loves her child, her only child, so you should develop metta, the same love, the same intensity of love towards all beings, which is a very, very high bar, isn't it? So the Buddha's using mental states, emotions, which people are familiar with, we're very familiar with, and saying almost like, turn it on your head now. This is what you've got to try and do for the Dharma. So just imagine if you really love the Dharma, just like you love a child, or you love the Dharma, you're attracted to the Dharma, just as you are attracted to whatever it is, your sensual pleasures or whatever it is that you are attracted to. Imagine if you had that same attraction. How easy it would be to practice the Dharma. You know, when you love someone, you'll travel miles, you'll get in an aeroplane and go to see them. You'll spend money to go and see this person that you love. And it's no hardship, you know, because you really want to do it. So imagine if you had that similar kind of desire, let's call it desire for the Dharma and delight in the Dharma. But here's another sutta. This is a nice one. This is another one that, you know, I really like these suttas where a monk has become demoralized and the Buddha goes to see him and does a bit of teaching and so on. I really like those. So I found another one, a man called Tissa, who was the Buddha's paternal cousin, apparently. And he said to his friends, my body feels like it's drugged. I'm disorientated. The teachings don't inspire me, and dullness and drowsiness fill my mind. I live the spiritual life dissatisfied and have doubts about the teachings. So, I live the spiritual life dissatisfied. What's the translation of dissatisfied? What's the original Pali for dissatisfied? Anabhirato. So, abhirato is delight. Anabhirato is without delight. So I've lost my delight in the Dharma. It's basically saying I've lost it. And when you no longer delight in the Dharma, it's really hard to practice. It's a real slog, and after a while you just come to a kind of a halt. I've said probably in this series of talks, I think, but I often say it, so I probably have said it, that it's so important to enjoy your practice of the Dharma. Sangharakshita took an idea of Freud's and slightly changed it. The idea of Freud's was there's a pleasure principle and a reality principle. So we won't talk about Freud's understanding of that. But Sangharakshita's understanding is that you need both in the spiritual life. So the reality principle needs to be there. The reality principle equals insight, vipassana. You're trying to see things as they really are. You're trying to see the truth. So that's the reality principle. But then there's the pleasure principle. It has to be enjoyable. That search for the truth has to be enjoyable. You have to take pleasure in it. You have to enjoy. You have to take delight in it. Otherwise, you'll come to a halt. You won't be able to continue. So you need both, really. And today's talk, because last week's talk was all about wisdom, the reality principle, this talk is very much about delight and pleasure. So the Buddha gets to hear this, and he asks Tissa to come and see him. And so he does the usual thing. The Buddha always does that. He just checks out that he's got the story right. He says, so tell me, what's happening? So Tissa repeats what I just told you. And then the Buddha gives him a teaching. Well, he doesn't so much give him a teaching. He engages him in a conversation. It's really rather lovely. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the whole thing, but he basically asks him questions. And when Tissa answers well, the Buddha says, good, Tissa, good. And the good is the translation of sadhu. He says, sadhu, Tissu, sadhu. And he keeps on going like this, drawing him out like this. And then it's then that the Buddha tells him the story of the ancient city, the lost city. There's a city in the middle of the jungle and it's been lost, and but it's always there. And that city, of course, is the Dharma. So even if you've lost it, it's there, it's still there. You just have to find it again. You know, it will never elude you completely. So he tells him this story, and he finishes up. This is lovely. He says, cheer up, Tissa. Cheer up, Tissa. So, of course, we only get the words, and we don't know, what the Buddha did with his body at that time, but I can't help thinking that he held Tissa. Maybe he held his hand and said, cheer up, Tissa, cheer up. Or maybe he embraced him. We don't imagine the Buddha embracing people, I suppose, do we? It just occurred to me today, well, why not? I mean, I don't know if you know any of our Indian friends, Indian order members and mitras. I mean, they're so tactile. They're always touching. I was walking, years ago I was walking down the street with an Indian order member and he held my hand. And I took my hand away and he said, no, you can't do that here. And he didn't understand, he just laughed and held my hand again and said, no, we can't do that here. This was 20 odd years ago. You do see men holding hands now, but in those days you didn't. But they're very, very tactile. So I imagine the Buddha was very much like that. I could just imagine him. He's his paternal cousin after a while. Probably knew him very well. I'm just holding him and saying, cheer up, Tissa. Of course, cheer up is a translation. And the word is abhirama. So delight again. So another translation is rejoice, Tissa, rejoice. Or be happy, Tissa, be happy. Or be delighted, be delighted. Bring your delight back in if you can, into your life. And then the Buddha says, I'm here to advise you, to support you and to teach you. And so then it says, satisfied, the Venerable Tissa was happy with what the Buddha said. So what's the Pali for that? Satisfied. Atamano. Mano is mind, Ata is up. So he's uplifted, his mind was uplifted. And Atamana means, according to the Pali English Dictionary, delighted, pleased, enraptured. Venerable Chissa was happy with what the Buddha said. What was happy? The Pali of happy. Abhinanditi means delighted. He was delighted. So this often happens when the Buddha gives a teaching, that the person he's been taught ends up happy and delighted. So this is what we should be aiming for, really, a feeling of happiness and delight in the Dharma. And then, moving on from the Pali Canon to the Mahayana, the Vimalakirti Nirdesha, one of my favourite texts, chapter 3. There's a household bhikkhu, not bhikkhu, a bodhisattva. When I say a household bodhisattva, I mean not a monk. This bodhisattva was not a monk. And, but he was a bodhisattva, and he just came out of his house, and Mara came. Now, Mara only arrives in your life when you're doing quite well in the spiritual life. As Sangharakshita once said, if you're not doing very well in the spiritual life, you're doing the work yourself. Mara doesn't have to distract you because you've done it yourself. But when you're doing quite well, when you're making progress, Mara thinks, oh, I've got to stop this person. They're making progress now. So obviously this bodhisattva, Jagatingdra, he must have been doing quite well. So Mara comes along. But Mara disguises himself as Shakra, king of the gods. And he bows down to Jagatingdra and says, oh, teacher, you're wonderful, you're wonderful. And, you know, can you bless me, please? And Jagatingdra is taken in by this. And he thinks, oh, wonderful, you know. And then, because Mara's got 12,000 maidens with him, devas, actually, devatas, beautiful young devatas. And Mara says, look, I want to give you these 12,000 maidens. And Jagatingdra says, no, I can't have those. I'm a Buddhist, you know, I can't have those. So then Vimalakirti turns up. And Vimalakirti says, I'll have them. And then Mara knows all about Vimalakirti. So he says, no, I didn't offer them to you, But Vimalakirti says, no, come on, give them to me. You offered them to him. He doesn't want them, so they're mine. So he has to give him the 12,000 maidens. So now Vimalakirti's got these 12,000 maidens. So then what happens? He teaches them the Dharma, right? And the bodhicitta arises within all of them. For those of you who don't really know what the bodhicitta is, it means they become bodhisattvas. So now these 12,000 goddesses, beautiful young goddesses, they become bodhisattvas on the spot. And then he says, you've just conceived the spirit of enlightenment, the bodhicitta. From now on, you should devote yourselves to find joy in the pleasures of the Dharma and should take no pleasure in desires. So why does he say should take no pleasures in desires? Because the goddesses are Mara's goddesses. And Mara is all about trying to distract people with sensual pleasures, bring them away from the spiritual life. So they're kind of experts in sensual pleasure. And so he says, look, stop taking pleasure in the senses now and find joy in the pleasures of the Dharma. And he tells them a bit more about this. I won't tell you the whole thing. It's rather a long passage. But then he says, or they then asked him, what is joy in the pleasures of the Dharma? And he says, it is the joy of unbreakable faith in the Buddha, of wishing to hear the Dharma, of serving the Sangha, and honouring spiritual friends without pride. It goes on a long passage about all the things. It's basically practicing the Dharma. So finding joy in the pleasures of the Dharma is practicing the Dharma. Lovely section. I'll just continue. This next part isn't completely connected with my talk, but it's so lovely that I can't resist it really. But what happens next is, so the Buddha, Vimalakirti teaches these 12,000 maidens, devatas, and they're all bodhisattvas now. And Mara says, can I have them back? And Vimalakirti says, yeah, you can have them back. I mean, we have to, don't take it too literally, because it looks a bit like dealing in living beings, doesn't it? Like sort of slave trade or something like that. But this is an imaginary fairy tale, so don't take it too literally. But says, you can have them back, I don't need them. So, but they don't want to go back. The goddesses don't want to go back into Mara's realm. They go, oh, what? Back there? We don't want to go back there. And he said, no, you'll be fine. And so they say, well, what should we do when we go back there? And so Vimalakirti replied, sisters, there is a door of the Dharma called the inexhaustible lamp. Practice it. What is it? Sisters, a single lamp may light hundreds of thousands of lamps without itself being diminished. Likewise, sisters, a single bodhisattva may establish many hundreds of thousands of living beings in enlightenment without his or her mindfulness being diminished. In fact, not only does it not diminish, it grows stronger. Likewise, the more you teach and demonstrate virtuous qualities to others, the more you grow with respect to these virtuous qualities. This is the door of the Dharma called the inexhaustible lamp. When you are living in the realm of Mara, inspire innumerable gods and goddesses with the spirit of enlightenment. In such a way, you will repay the kindness of the Tathagata, and you will become the benefactors of all living beings. It's one of my favorite sections in all Buddhist texts. Finding joy in the pleasures of the Dharma, followed by the inexhaustible lamp. And I think they do go with each other. First, you need to find joy in the pleasures of the Dharma. And when you've got that, then you can teach the Dharma. Because as Sangharakshita once said, the Dharma is at least caught as much as it's taught. And if you're not delighting in the Dharma, it's hard for people to catch it themselves. So I think just one more. No, that's it. That's it for delighting in the Dharma. Maybe before we move on to the next bit, I should just say a bit more about delighting in the Dharma, because it's something that I consider to be really, really important. And the reason it's important because of my history as a Buddhist practitioner, but there are times when I did not delight in the Dharma, or could not delight in the Dharma, and became demoralized, just like Tissa became demoralized. And what's really, really important, I think, is to find some way back into delight, something that you delight in. And I think that the best way to go about things is to follow those things that you find enjoyable in the Dharma. You don't have to try to be like everybody else. Just whatever turns you on in the Dharma, follow that. So for me, it's studying, it's thinking, it's teaching, writing. I love doing all those things. There are other aspects of the Dharma which perhaps I should find delight in, but I don't. So I don't really worry too much about that. I find delight in these things, and so I just follow them. And it seems to work. It seems to work really well for me. So whatever it is that really attracts you about the Dharma, whether it's poetry, the art of the Dharma, the myths of the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings from the Pali Canon, or the Mahayana, or the Vajrayana, or meditation, study, whatever, then follow that. Find what you're delighted in and really delight in that. Just keep on delighting in that. And as the Buddha said, if you love the Dharma, you will grow and develop. If you don't like the Dharma, you get a bit stuck, really. So that's delighting in the Dharma. I promised I was going to talk about that, and I have done. But now we come to the main part, what should be the main part of the talk, where the Buddha talks about the wonderful things in the Dharma. And he mentions a list of lists, basically. And the list of lists altogether make up what's called the 37 Bodhipaka Dharmas, the 37 elements of the Dharma. And the Buddha talks about this in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. I think that's the final reference. The Mahaparinibbana Sutta is the account of the Buddha's last few months alive. And he was still traveling around and teaching. And he said, towards the very end of his life, he said, what are those teachings that have, with deep knowledge, been taught by me, which, after grasping them well, you should practice, develop, and make a lot of them, so that the spiritual life may last long and may endure for a long time. That will be for the benefit of many people, for the happiness of many people, out of compassion for the world, for the welfare, the benefits and happiness of gods and humans. So what are those teachings? They are as follows. The 4 ways of attending to mindfulness, the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 right efforts, the 4 paths to power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers or the 5 strengths, the 7 factors of awakening, and the Noble Eightfold Path. If you add all those up together, that comes to 37. It's funny, when the Buddha was traveling around in the last few months of his life, according to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, he taught the threefold way probably more than anything else. But he hasn't included it here for some reason, I don't know why. If I were the Buddha, I would have included the threefold way, because that would have made it up to 40, which is a much better number, isn't it, than 37. The 40 things, but anyway, he didn't, so we are stuck with the 37. And I am not going to talk about any of them today, none of them. Tell you why in a moment. But before I do, a bit later on in the Pali, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha says to Ananda, it may be, Ananda, that some of you may think in this way, the teacher's instructions have ceased. When he dies, that is. There is now no teacher for us. But it should not be seen like that, Ananda. Whatever teaching and discipline has been taught by me, that is your teacher after my passing away. So what he's saying there is all those teachings that he's given, when he dies, they will be your teacher. So so it's the same for us, isn't it? Our teacher is the Buddha's teachings. Now, interesting thing about the 37 Bodhipaka Dharmas, they're all practices. So the Four Noble Truths isn't in there. The Four Noble Truths isn't in there because it's not practices. It's a formula. It's a way of talking about the Dharma. It doesn't include any practices. So they're all practices. They're all things that you do, which throws a bit of light on what it means to be a Buddhist. To be a Buddhist is to do something, not just to believe, not just to think, but actually to practice, to do something. And all of those 37 Bodhipaka Dharmas are practices. And there's a whole list of them there. And there are many more in the Pali Canon, of course. I've just mentioned one, the Threefold Way, which is not there for some reason. But then we are inheritors not only of the Pali Canon, but also of all the Mahayana texts and all the Vajrayana texts. And so there are loads of teaching in those too, loads of practices. So it's very easy for someone, if they go on the internet or they buy books and so on, it's very easy to get the impression that the Dharma is really complex. And how does this fit with this? And you have these kind of, conundrums. I don't see how the Four Noble Truths fits with this. And you try to fit them in and so on. They don't always seem to fit very well. And so it seems to be very complicated. And I'm always saying, well, it's not. The Dharma is really, really simple. It's really, really simple. The actual practice is really simple. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to move from the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, more or less, to 1978. And we're going to go to Padmaloka, and we're going to be with Sangharakshita. He was running a seminar there for order members. And the seminar was on a text by Nagarjuna, the Precious Garland, as it's translated. Ratnamala, the Ratnamala. And but one day, I got this from someone who was on the seminar, actually. He said, one day Bhante came down, after breakfast to leave the seminar one morning. And he said, look, before we go back into the text, there's something I've been thinking about. So it's quite exciting. He'd been thinking something through and he wanted to share that. And I'm still really excited by it. So it's 1978. And as I go through it, you'll begin to recognize it. So I'm just going to read you some of what he said. So Sangratch, he said, I was just thinking this morning, before we actually go into the verses, it might be useful to consider what are the principal stages of the spiritual path in practical terms. Because in Buddhist texts, not only sutras, but in all kinds of books on Buddhism, which are being produced nowadays, one finds different descriptions of the path. Some of them very good descriptions, but they don't always agree. Sometimes, in fact, they're very, very different from one another. Sometimes they overlap. Some of these descriptions are very detailed, and we sometimes get rather lost in the detail. You can't help wondering exactly where we are and what exactly we have to do to get on to the next stage or sub-stage or even sub-stage. So that's how he begins. So then he says, I thought it might be useful to outline the main stages of the path. So he says, it seems to me that we can regard the whole spiritual path as consisting of 5 great stages. So there's a clue there for some of you, maybe thinking, oh, I think I know those. So then he says what they are. So I can say that the first stage is really the stage of mindfulness and awareness. This is really the first thing that one has to do, to develop mindfulness and awareness. So we know that. Which means especially developing self-awareness, which in turn means integration. So in a way, mindfulness is also the stage of integration. We bring all our scattered bits together, we integrate ourselves, we overcome conflict within ourselves, disharmony within ourselves, etc., etc. Right, so probably some of you have figured out this is the 5 great stages that we know of. Integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and spiritual receptivity. But wait, because it's different here. And this is why I'm telling you about this. And I think this is really important. This is the first time this has occurred to Sangratcha. And sometimes first thoughts are best thoughts. Yeah. So then comes what I can describe as the stage of positive emotion. Yeah. Positive emotion means friendliness, compassion, joy, equanimity, faith, devotion, etc. So in as much as positive emotion is something that moves, not something static, it's also the stage of energy. And here, one develops not simply positive emotion, but even spiritual emotions. And here the whole question, the whole subject of spiritual beauty becomes important. Right, so that's those two, and we know these two. Third one, what's the third one? The third stage, one could say, is the stage of vision. Vision. In this stage, one sees the truth. So it's also the stage of openness. Openness in the direction of ultimate reality. Not holding back on the progress of expansion. Not opening up so far, that is to say, opening up as regards positive emotion, but then refusing to open any further. No, it's indefinite openness to the ultimate, or in terms of sight, a vision of reality, a vision of truth. So this is the stage that later Sangratcha called the stage of spiritual death. Personally, I think the stage of vision is a better way of thinking about it. It's much more positive. Well, almost anything is more positive than death, I suppose. He then goes on to say, this is also incidentally the stage of death, one might say. It's the stage of spiritual death, because it signifies that the death of the old self, the death of the ego, and the birth, if you like, the seed of Buddhahood of the new self, the seed of Buddhahood. So the third stage is the stage of vision, the stage of insight and openness to reality. Fourth stage, then comes what we call the stage of transformation. Yeah? Not the stage of spiritual rebirth in this early iteration of the path, but the stage of transformation. This is when the vision that you have seen, or if you like, your experience of reality starts, as it were, descending and transforming every aspect of your being. This is also the stage of meditation, in a sense. The practice of meditation in the sense of dwelling on that visionary experience, that glimpse of reality, so as to deepen it and broaden it and to bring it down, as it were, so that it pervades and transforms all the different aspects of your being. Wonderful stuff. Fifthly and lastly, we have what we may call the stage of compassionate activity. So in the 5 great stages of the path that we're now familiar with, that has been changed to spiritual receptivity. Now there's a reason for that, is because after Bhante came up with these ideas, he then tried to fit it to the 5 meditations that order members do: mindfulness of breathing, metta bhavana, 6-element practice being an insight practice, visualization practice being spiritual rebirth, and then just sitting practice, meaning doing nothing and being receptive. But here, it's not spiritual receptivity, it's the stage of compassionate activity. And this makes great sense, doesn't it? Because first you get yourself together, mindfulness, integration, and then you develop positive emotion, you become a friendly person, compassionate, kind. And then, because of your practicing like that, you gain insight, you understand things better. And then on the basis of your insight, you then transform the whole of your life. And then what do? You go and help people. This is what the Buddha did. This is what all the Buddhist disciples did too. It was all in order to then go and share the Dharma and help people. So that's how it works. One could also say, this is Bhante, one could also say that this is also the stage of spontaneity, true spontaneity, where you don't sort of take thought. You don't think what you're going to do to help others, at least not in the ordinary way. You just spontaneously function. You just do what needs to be done. There's a sort of overflow of your fully enlightened being. Well, you don't have to be fully enlightened, I don't think. So that's the way he first talked about these 5 great stages, and I find them very, very inspiring. But then he goes on to say, okay, so there are 5 great stages, and I've spoken of them as stages, but of course, you lot, you probably won't do them in stages. You know, you don't practice the path of regular steps. You more like the path of irregular steps. So let's translate this for you. I was being a bit naughty there. He didn't exactly say that, but it was more or less that. So then he says, actually, you can go through them in stages, but you can also practice them all together. So rather than being stages, a sequence, you could see them more like a mandala, that you're practicing all of them all together. And this becomes very interesting. So what does this mean? Back to Bhante. What does this mean? It means that all the time, that is to say, every day, one has got 5 things to practice as best you can. So this is what I love about this teaching. All you need to do is remember 5 things and do them every day. Simple as that. First, one has to keep up the effort to be mindful and aware, and to be as together as possible, as integrated as possible. You have to forgive in the language, because it was 1978 when we were always talking about being together. You know, get together, man, and get your shit together and all that kind of thing. One has to keep up the effort to be mindful and aware, as integrated as possible. 2, one remains in as positive a mental state as one possibly can. 3, one does not lose sight of one's ultimate goal at any time. So you're always keeping the idea of awakening in your mind all the time. It's always present. If not awakening, then the truth, you know, reality. This is what we're after, isn't it? 4, one tries to apply this, your awareness of the ultimate goal. One tries to apply this to practice at every level. Whatever you've realized or discovered or seen on the highest level of your being at any time. I'll just say that again. So the 3rd one is one does not lose sight of one's ultimate goal at any time. But the 4th one is one tries to apply this to practice at every level. Whatever you've realized or discovered or seen on the highest level of your being at any time. So whenever you have insights, sometimes you go on retreat and you see things more clearly than you've done before. Let's call that insight. You've had an insight, some clarity. Then what you try to do is you try to live with that clarity. You try to bring it back all the time. What was that clarity I had? Oh yeah, that's it. So you're always bringing those moments of your highest being to bear on your life all the time. And fifthly, and you do your best for other people. You do what you can to help people. All these 5 simultaneously, every day. This is Bante. This is your spiritual life. And this is your spiritual practice. These are the things with which you are basically concerned. You can, as it were, forget about all the other formulations. So this is what we're doing. This is what our movement is really. As a disciple of Sangharakshita, this is what I've been trying to do for 45 years now. Been trying to do these 5 things every day, and obviously failing quite a lot of the time. Finally, and I'm going to finish with this. So, if you just try to do these 5 things all the time, you can forget all about making progress. Forget about making progress. I love that. And being a true disciple of Sangharakshita, I have never, ever wondered if I'm making progress. Well, I have, and that's why I left the movement for a while. But since I come back, it's like, I don't know where I'm at. And you know what? I don't care. What matters is that I'm practicing the Dharma. Does it matter whether I'm a stream entrant or a once returner or a bodhisattva or not? What does it matter? We all have to practice the Dharma, so you can just forget it. Sangharakshita has always encouraged us to do that. Don't think about yourself. It's too self-referential. Don't wonder where you're at on the path. Just practice. So I'll say that again. So if you can just try to do these 5 things all the time, you can forget all about making progress or exactly where you are along the path, because it doesn't matter. One just intensifies one's efforts in these 5 directions, as it were, all the time. One simply can't go wrong then. Yeah? One simply can't go wrong then. The end.